The last shovel of dirt on my husband's grave felt like a door slamming shut on my life. 40 years, gone. Vanished into a 6-foot hole in the cold, unforgiving earth. They say grief is a wave, but for me, it was a silence. A profound, echoing quiet where his laughter used to be. And in that quiet, I thought the worst was finally over. I was wrong. The worst was just getting its coat undone. If you believe that the deepest betrayals come not from our enemies, but from those who should have been our family, then you know the kind of story this is. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I lost everything I'd ever built, and how I took it all back with a single sheet of paper. If you appreciate a story where justice is served cold, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm that patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon. Part 1, The Hollow Echo. The day after we buried Harold was a Tuesday. I remember that because the trash bins were out on the curb all down our street, a mundane little detail in a world that had tilted clean off its axis. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, that pale, sickly gray that promises rain but never delivers. I drove home from my sister's house in Harold's old Buick, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white mountains on a pale map of skin. Every turn was a memory, every landmark a ghost. There was the diner where he'd proposed, the park where we'd taught our son, lost so young, to ride his bike, the oak tree we'd carved our initials into as teenagers. My life wasn't just in the house, it was woven into the very fabric of this town, a tapestry 40 years in the making, with Harold's thread running right beside mine. As I turned onto our street, a flash of ugly, commercial yellow caught my eye. A moving truck. It was parked in my driveway, its ramp lowered like a thirsty tongue to the walkway. For a moment, my grief-addled brain didn't process it. Maybe a neighbor was moving? But it was parked squarely in my driveway, blocking the garage. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to pool in my stomach. It felt like swallowing ice water. I parked on the street and walked toward the house. The front door was wide open, a gaping wound. Inside, I could hear a voice. A voice I'd known, and tolerated, for 4 decades. A voice that had always dripped with a kind of condescending authority, like he was the king and the rest of us were just visiting his court. Charles Collins. My father-in-law. He was standing in the center of our living room, a space that just 2 days ago had been filled with mourners and casseroles. Now, it was being systematically dismantled. He was a tall man, even at 85, with a spine that refused to stoop and a shock of white hair that he still combed with expensive pomade. He wore a pressed shirt and trousers, even on a Tuesday morning. He always looked like he was about to sign a contract or foreclose on a widow. 2 burly men I'd never seen before were carefully maneuvering Harold's favorite armchair, a worn, leather monstrosity that was molded perfectly to his shape, through the doorway. Charles wasn't helping, of course. He was directing, pointing a long, imperious finger. Careful with that. It's an antique. Put it on the far side of the truck, cover it with a blanket. He saw me then. His eyes, the same sharp blue as Harold's but utterly devoid of their warmth, flickered with something that wasn't surprise. It was anticipation. A smug, predatory gleam. "Margaret," he said. The name came out flat, clipped. He never called me Maggie. To him, I was always Margaret, the woman who had married his only son. An appendage. A temporary fixture. My voice was a whisper, lost in the cavern of the suddenly empty room. "Charles? What is going on?" He took a deliberate step toward me, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the hardwood floors where my husband's slippers used to shuffle. The smell of his cologne, a cloying sandalwood, filled the air, choking out the faint, lingering scent of Harold's pipe tobacco that I'd been clinging to. "This property," he began, his voice dropping into a tone of feigned sympathy that was more insulting than any shout, "was purchased by my father. It has been in the Collins family for 3 generations. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. "With Harold gone, it reverts to blood family. It's a matter of legacy, you understand." I just stared at him. The sound in the room seemed to warp, the movers' grunts and the scrape of furniture fading into a dull roar in my ears. Blood family. The words were like stones thrown at a window. I had held his son's hand as he took his last breath. I had raised their grandchild in this very house before we lost him, too. I had cooked thousands of meals, planted hundreds of flowers, cried and laughed, and lived every single day of my adult life within these walls. But I wasn't blood. I don't understand, I said, and my voice was stronger now, a flicker of defiance cutting through the fog of grief. This is my home. Charles let out a short, dismissive sigh. It was the same sound he'd made when Harold announced he was going to art school instead of business school. The same sound he'd made when I'd served chicken instead of beef at Christmas dinner. The sound of utter, unshakable disapproval. It was the home you shared with my son, he corrected, his lips thinning into a pale line. Now, it is my home. Or rather, it will be sold. The profits will remain within the family trust. He gestured vaguely toward the staircase with a flick of his wrist. Pack your bags, Margaret. A few suitcases. Personal effects. You were only married in. You have no claim here. Only married in. The phrase echoed in the hollow space where my heart was supposed to be. 40 years of love, of partnership, of building a life, reduced to a legal technicality by a man who saw family as a balance sheet. I looked past him, at the empty space where our wedding photo had hung just yesterday. A pale rectangle of dust on the wallpaper was all that remained. They'd already packed it. My own wedding photo. I felt a tremor start in my hands, a rage so pure and so cold it felt like ice water flooding my veins. But I didn't let it show. Years of dealing with Charles had taught me that emotion was a currency he didn't value. He saw tears as weakness and anger as hysterics. So I did what I had always done. I went still. I became calm. My mother used to say I had the stillness of a deep lake, that you could never tell what was happening in the depths. I let my eyes drift around the room, taking in the chaos. The movers were now wrapping my grandmother's china in newspaper. My grandmother. Not his. They were taking my history, too. I looked back at Charles, his face a mask of smug certainty. He expected a fight. He expected tears, pleading, a scene. He was bracing for it, his posture rigid with self-righteousness. I gave him none of it. I smoothed down the front of my black dress and took a slow, deliberate breath. Is that so? I said softly. My voice was even, almost conversational. It seemed to confuse him. He blinked, his rhythm thrown off. It is, he said, recovering quickly. The law is the law. Well, Charles, I said, taking a small step back toward the open doorway, giving the movers a clear path. You'd better finish up then. His frown was a masterpiece of confusion. This wasn't in his script. I was supposed to be the grieving widow, hysterical and helpless. Not this. Not this quiet, unnerving calm. I stood there, by the door, small and silent, my silver hair pinned neatly as it was every morning, my eyes as placid as a summer sky right before a lightning strike. I watched them. I watched them haul out the sofa where Harold and I had watched countless movies. I watched them pack the box of my favorite books, their cracked spines like old friends. I watched them take the small, hand-painted rocking horse we had bought for our son, a relic of a pain so deep I rarely touched it, but couldn't bear to part with. Charles oversaw it all, a conquering general securing his spoils. He didn't look at me again. In his mind, I was already gone. A ghost in a house that was no longer mine. When the last box was loaded onto the truck, one of the movers, a young man with kind eyes and a look of profound discomfort, glanced at me apologetically. I gave him a tiny, reassuring nod. It wasn't his fault. He was just a pawn in a cruel man's game. The truck was full. My life was sitting in the back of a yellow truck in my own driveway. Charles paid the movers in cash, peeling bills from a thick money clip with an air of finality. He walked back toward me, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "Well," he said, rocking back on his heels. "That's that." He expected me to leave. To slump my shoulders, turn around, and walk away into my new, diminished life. But I didn't move. I waited until the movers had closed the truck's heavy door with a deafening bang. I waited until the engine rumbled to life. I waited until the entire world seemed to shrink down to just the two of us, standing on the porch of the house that held 40 years of my soul. Then, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a sharp, thin thing. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You forgot one crucial thing," I said, my voice as soft and clear as a ringing bell. Charles's triumphant expression faltered. He frowned, a genuine, irritated crease forming between his brows. "And what's that? Your knitting basket?" The men did a thorough sweep. I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang in the air, savoring his momentary confusion. He thought he had won. He thought he had erased me. But Harold had known his father. Oh, he had known him so well. And Harold had loved me more than Charles could ever comprehend. And love, I was about to prove, leaves a paper trail. Part 2, The Cold of the Sterile Room. Charles stood there, silhouetted against the open doorway of my home, a dark monument to his own arrogance. The moving truck's diesel engine rumbled, a guttural sound that seemed to mock the sudden quiet between us. His impatience was a tangible thing, a crackle in the air. He was a man used to efficiency, to problems simply disappearing when he willed them to. And I, Margaret Collins, was a problem that was failing to disappear. "What is it, Margaret?" he snapped, the veneer of civility gone. "Spit it out." "I have things to do. Calls to make. A realtor to contact." Each word was a fresh shovel of dirt on my life. He wasn't just evicting me, he was already liquidating my past. I let my gaze drift from his impatient face to the magnolias blooming in the front yard. Harold had planted that tree for me on our 10th anniversary. Its waxy white blossoms were like tiny promises we'd kept to each other over the years. Charles wouldn't even see them as he tore them down. To him, it was just landscaping to be cleared. That was the moment the grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to change. It didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It hardened into something sharp, something focused. It became fuel. But the time wasn't right. Not yet. The script for this little play had been written long ago, and I knew my lines. More importantly, I knew my cue. And this wasn't it. The truest, most satisfying revenge isn't a quick, impulsive act. It's a slow, deliberate strangulation. And Charles had only just begun to feel the pressure. So, I let him have his victory. For now. I gave him another one of those thin, unreadable smiles. "Nothing, Charles," I said, my voice a silken thread. "You're right. You've been very thorough." Without another word, I turned and walked to my husband's Buick. I didn't look back. I could feel his eyes on me, burning with a mixture of triumph and irritation. I put the key in the ignition, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble. I pulled away from the curb, and in my rearview mirror, I saw him. He stood on the porch for a moment, a king surveying his newly conquered territory, before turning and disappearing into my house, closing the door firmly behind him. My door. The drive away from my home was the longest drive of my life. The world outside the car window seemed to be moving in slow motion, a blurry, indifferent dream. I had no destination. I had my purse, the clothes on my back, and a car that smelled faintly of Harold. Where does a 68-year-old woman go when her life has been loaded into a truck and driven away? I ended up at a place I never thought I'd see the inside of, a bleak, roadside motel called the Starlight Inn. Its sign was missing the S, so it just read Tarlight Inn, a sad, blinking monument to decay. The room cost $65 a night. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The carpet was a swirl of nauseating brown and orange, and the bedspread felt like sandpaper. As I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the reality of my situation crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. The silence in that sterile, anonymous room was a different kind of silence than the one in my house. It wasn't a silence of loss, it was a silence of non-existence. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The four walls of my home, which had held and protected me, were gone. I was untethered, floating in a sea of grief and rage. That first night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the hum of the ice machine down the hall and the roar of trucks on the highway. Every sound was an intrusion. Every shadow was a monster. I kept replaying Charles's words in my head. Blood family. Only married in. He had seen me as a temporary guest for 40 years. A placeholder. It was a profound, soul-crushing invalidation of my entire existence. Had he always thought this? At family dinners, at birthdays, at our son's funeral, had he always been looking at me with that same cold calculation, just waiting for Harold to be gone so he could reclaim what he believed was his? The days that followed blurred into a miserable, gray fog. I lived on burnt coffee from the motel lobby and stale crackers from a vending machine. I would spend hours just sitting in the car in a grocery store parking lot, watching families come and go, a lump of bitter envy lodged in my throat. I tried calling a few old friends, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain this? How do you say, my husband is dead, and his father has thrown me out of my own life? The shame of it was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Charles, meanwhile, was wasting no time in erasing me. A week after he'd kicked me out, I gathered the courage to drive by my old street. It was a mistake. A massive, bright red for sale sign was staked into my front lawn. But that wasn't the worst part. He had hired a landscaping crew. They were tearing out my rose bushes, the ones I'd cultivated for 30 years, the ones that had won prizes at the county fair. They were hacking at them with shears, throwing the blood-red petals and thorny stems into a pile like trash. I had to pull the car over a block away, my body shaking with a helpless, volcanic rage. He wasn't just taking a house, he was desecrating a sanctuary. He was salting the earth of my memories. That night, back in the motel room that felt more like a prison cell every day, I finally broke. The stillness I had maintained for so long shattered into a million pieces. The tears I hadn't shed at the funeral, or when the moving truck drove away, came in a hot, ragged torrent. I wept for Harold. I wept for my son. I wept for the woman I used to be, the one who felt safe, the one who had a home. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut, until there was nothing left inside me but a cold, hard emptiness. And in that emptiness, a new thought began to form. It was time to see a lawyer. I found a small, independent firm in the next town over. The lawyer was a young woman named Sarah Jenkins. She had kind eyes, much like the mover, but a sharp, intelligent mind that was immediately apparent. She listened patiently as I recounted the story, her expression growing more and more concerned. "This is highly unusual, Mrs. Collins," she said when I finished, tapping her pen on a legal pad. "Typically, spousal rights are very clear. But if the house was part of a long-standing family trust, and your husband's name was the only one on the deed," she trailed off, her brow furrowed. "It could get complicated. Charles Collins is a very wealthy, very well-connected man. A legal battle would be protracted. And expensive." She was trying to be gentle, to manage my expectations. She saw a grieving, displaced widow with limited resources going up against a titan. She saw an impossible fight. I let her finish, let her lay out all the obstacles, all the reasons why I should probably just walk away, take whatever small settlement Charles might offer, and try to piece together a new life. I listened to it all, my hands resting calmly in my lap. When she was done, I reached into my purse. It was the same purse I'd had that day at the house. Inside, past the tissues and the tube of lipstick and the wallet, was a thin, manila folder. It was worn at the edges, soft with age. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew its contents better than I knew my own heartbeat. I slid it across her polished mahogany desk. "I don't think it will be as complicated as you think," I said. Sarah opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the first page, a standard property deed. She nodded. Then her eyes moved to the second page. And the third. Her professional composure dissolved. Her jaw went slightly slack, and her eyes widened. She looked up from the papers, then back down, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She looked at me, a new light of understanding, and frankly, awe, dawning in her expression. Inside the folder was a quitclaim deed. It was dated 12 years ago. It was a simple, legal document that transferred full ownership of the property at 112 Elm Street from Harold Collins to Margaret Collins, his wife. It was signed by Harold, in his familiar, looping script. It was witnessed. And at the bottom was the embossed, irrefutable seal of a county notary. Sarah finally looked up at me, her mouth in a small O of shock. "Mrs. Collins, this is ironclad. The house is entirely, 100%, legally yours. It has been for over a decade." I gave her a small, sad smile. "I know," I said. Harold wasn't a fool. He knew his father. He did this the day after Charles made a comment at Thanksgiving about how the house would always be a Collins legacy. Harold had come home that night, his face grim. He didn't say much, but the next day he told me we needed to go see an attorney, just to tidy up the paperwork. He called it our insurance policy. A final act of love and protection from a man who knew he might not always be there to stand between me and the storm. Sarah closed the folder, her hands almost reverent. The dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. I was no longer a victim. I was a client with an airtight case. "What do you want to do?" she asked, her voice now filled with a new energy. "We can file an emergency injunction, have him served, get him out of there by the end of the week." I thought about it. I thought about the quick, clean, legal solution. But then I thought of my rose bushes, hacked to pieces on the lawn. I thought of my wedding photos in a box. I thought of 40 years of my life being dismissed as married in. A simple eviction wasn't enough. An injunction was a legal document. It lacked poetry. It lacked justice. Charles had orchestrated a public, humiliating removal of my life, piece by piece. He deserved the same. He deserved a performance. He deserved a reckoning. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on her desk. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my gut. But now, it had a new companion, rage. And I was about to build a fortress around it. "No," I said, and my voice was steady and clear, with an edge of pure, cold steel. "We're not going to do it the fast way. We're going to do it the right way. My way." Sarah looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "All right, Mrs. Collins," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Tell me about your way." And that's when the planning began. Part 3: The Architecture of a Reckoning. The motel room, once a symbol of my displacement and despair, transformed into a war room. The lumpy bed became my desk, the flimsy nightstand my filing cabinet. Sarah Jenkins, my young, sharp-as-a-tack lawyer, proved to be not just a legal advisor, but a willing co-conspirator. There was a fire in her eyes, a passion for justice that went beyond billable hours. She saw in my case not just a property dispute, but a righteous cause. "He can't just do this," she'd said during one of our late-night phone calls, her voice indignant on my behalf. The sheer audacity. The cruelty. "We're not just going to win, Margaret. We're going to make a point." I liked Sarah. I liked her a lot. The first step was information. We needed to know exactly what Charles was doing. My Buick became my surveillance vehicle. I'd park a street over, a scarf over my hair, sunglasses hiding my eyes, feeling like a spy in my own life. I watched as the for sale sign went up, a garish red slash against the green of my lawn. I saw the realtor, a woman with unnaturally blonde hair and a predatory smile, walk through my front door with prospective buyers. The thought of strangers treading on my floors, judging the color of my kitchen tiles, opening the closet where Harold's clothes still hung, it was a violation that stoked the fire of my resolve. One afternoon, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another truck pulled up. Not a moving truck, but a construction waste container. Charles was starting renovations. He was gutting my life to make it more palatable for a quick sale. He was ripping out the floral wallpaper I'd picked out with my mother, the built-in bookshelves Harold had made with his own hands. Every nail pulled from the wall was another piece of my history being discarded. This confirmed my decision. A quiet, legal letter wouldn't do. The punishment had to fit the crime. The humiliation had to be symmetrical. He had uprooted my life with a moving truck, I would do the same to him. Our plan began to take shape, each piece meticulously crafted. Sarah handled the legal framework, ensuring every step we took was unimpeachable. She drew up official notices and confirmed the deeds recording with the county clerk's office, creating a paper shield around us. My role was the orchestration, the stagecraft. First, the movers. I didn't want some anonymous national company. I wanted a local crew. I found a company called Three Brothers Moving, run by, well, three brothers. They were big, no-nonsense guys who had moved half the town at some point. More importantly, they were known for their discretion and their efficiency. I met with the eldest brother, a man named Frank with a kind face and hands like catcher's mitts. I sat in their small, cluttered office and told them a modified version of the truth. My father-in-law has been staying at my house while I was away, I explained, my voice steady. There's been a misunderstanding about the living arrangements. I need him, and his belongings, moved out. It's a delicate situation. Frank nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. You need us to be quick and quiet? No, I said, leaning forward. I need you to be professional. And I need you to be there on a very specific day, at a very specific time. And you will take your instructions only from me. I booked them for a Thursday. 2 weeks from then. At precisely 9 a.m. Next, the audience. Charles's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He believed he was untouchable, that his status and wealth made him immune to consequence. I needed to shatter that illusion not just for him, but in front of the world he cared so much about, the world of his peers. Charles was a member of the Oak Creek Country Club, a place where men like him gathered to drink scotch, smoke cigars, and congratulate each other on their fortunes. He had a weekly standing golf game. Every Thursday morning. Like clockwork. He would be on the 8th hole around 9:30 a.m., surrounded by the very people whose opinions he valued more than anything. My plan required him to be absent. It was perfect. But I added another layer. I contacted the realtor, the one with the blonde hair, pretending to be an interested buyer. I used a fake name, Mrs. Gable, and spoke with a slightly different, more clipped accent. I gushed about the property photos online. It's simply divine, I cooed into the phone. But my husband is very particular about structure. Could we possibly arrange a private viewing? And could we bring our contractor to look at the foundations? Say, Thursday morning? Around 10 a.m.? She jumped at the chance. A private viewing with a contractor meant a serious buyer. We set the appointment. Charles would have to be there to let them in. He would cancel his golf game. He would be home. He would be waiting. He would be the guest of honor at his own eviction party. The 2 weeks leading up to that Thursday were the longest of my life. I felt a strange duality. By day, I was a ghost, haunting the edges of my own town, living out of a sterile motel room. But in the quiet of the evenings, I was a general, planning a campaign. I felt a focus I hadn't felt in years, a clarity that cut through the fog of grief. Harold was gone, but his last gift to me was this battle. And for him, for us, I would not lose. There was one moment of doubt. The Tuesday before the planned eviction, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I sat in my motel room eating a cold sandwich, and I suddenly felt old. A tired, old woman playing a dangerous game. What if Charles fought back? What if he caused a scene? What if this all blew up in my face? The fear was a cold, slithering thing, whispering that I should just let it go, that it wasn't worth it. I closed my eyes, and an image of Harold flashed in my mind. It was from years ago, on our anniversary. He'd given me a small, beautifully crafted wooden box he'd made. Inside, there was no jewelry, no trinket. There was just a single, perfect key. "What's this for?" I had asked. He'd smiled, that gentle, loving smile that always made me feel safe. "It's the key to the front door," he said. "I just wanted you to have one that I made for you. To remind you that this is just as much your house as it is mine. No, more. A house is just wood and nails. You're the one who made it a home." The memory was like a splash of cold water. This wasn't just about property. It was about my identity. It was about Harold's legacy. Charles wasn't just trying to take a house, he was trying to say that my life, our life together, hadn't mattered. The doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The night before the move, I laid out my clothes. Not a black dress of mourning, but a smart, cream-colored pantsuit I had bought for a garden party years ago. It was the color of vanilla ice cream, the color of magnolias. It was the color of a new beginning. I packed my few belongings from the motel room into a single suitcase. I would not be returning here. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. I didn't dream of loss or of ghosts. I dreamed of my garden. I dreamed of the feel of rich, dark earth in my hands, of the sun on my back, of the slow, patient, and inevitable triumph of a well-tended seed. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I did my hair, pinning it up with steady hands. I applied a touch of lipstick. When I looked in the motel mirror, it wasn't a grieving widow staring back at me. It was Margaret Collins, the master of 112 Elm Street. I checked out of the Starlight Inn, leaving the key on the counter. I drove to the little cafe down the street from my house and ordered a black coffee. I sat by the window, watching the world wake up. At 8:45 a.m., the big, white truck of the Three Brothers Moving Company rumbled past. At 8:55 a.m., I saw Sarah's sensible sedan pull up and park a few houses down. At 9 a.m. sharp, I finished my coffee, left a $5 bill on the table, and walked out into the cool morning air. The stage was set. The actors were in place. And Charles Collins was about to walk into the final act of a play he never even knew he was starring in. Part 4, The Turning of the Key. I walked down Elm Street, the click of my heels on the pavement the only sound in the quiet morning. The air was crisp, smelling of cut grass and damp earth. A perfect day for a reckoning. As I approached my house, I saw the scene exactly as I had pictured it. The Three Brothers Moving truck was parked at the curb, its sheer size a statement of intent. The Three Brothers themselves were standing beside it, sipping coffee from paper cups, waiting patiently. They nodded at me as I approached, a silent acknowledgement. They were ready. Sarah got out of her car, holding a leather briefcase. She gave me a small, encouraging smile. "Showtime," she whispered. I took a deep breath. This was it. 40 years of quiet tolerance, weeks of silent suffering, all culminating in this single moment. I walked up the path, past the butchered remains of my rose bushes, and stepped onto my own front porch. Through the window, I could see Charles. He was pacing in the living room, a phone pressed to his ear. He was dressed in a golf shirt and slacks, clearly irritated that his morning ritual had been interrupted. He was probably berating the realtor. I didn't bother knocking. I reached into my purse and pulled out the key Harold had made for me, the one from the wooden box. It slid into the lock with a familiar, satisfying click. The sound of the door opening made Charles spin around. When he saw me, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What in God's name are you doing?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the half-empty house. "I told you this is no longer your home. This is trespassing." I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. Sarah followed, a quiet, professional shadow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Hello, Charles," I said, my voice calm and even. "I believe you have some of my things. I've come to collect them." He took a step toward me, his chest puffed out, every inch the indignant patriarch. "Your things are in storage. I had them moved. Now get out before I call the police." "Oh, I don't think you'll be calling anyone," I said sweetly. I nodded toward the movers visible through the front window. "You see, Charles, I've brought my own movers today. But they're not here for my things." His eyes narrowed, confusion warring with his anger. He glanced out the window at the large truck, then back at me. "What is this? Some kind of pathetic stunt?" That's when Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Collins," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am Margaret Collins's legal counsel." Charles scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England's lawyer. This house belongs to the Collins Family Trust. She has no claim." "That's where you're mistaken," Sarah said, opening her briefcase. She produced a single, crisp sheet of paper. It was a certified copy of the quitclaim deed. This document, filed and recorded with the county clerk 12 years ago, transferred full and sole ownership of this property to Margaret Collins. The family trust has had no legal claim to this house for over a decade. You are the one who is trespassing. I watched Charles's face. It was a slow, beautiful, and terrible thing to behold. He snatched the paper from Sarah's hand. His eyes, accustomed to scanning stock reports and legal contracts, flew across the page. I saw the exact moment the words registered. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. The paper began to tremble in his hand. His blustering rage collapsed, imploding into a cavern of stunned silence. He looked from the paper to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. "No," he whispered. It wasn't a denial, it was a plea. "No. Harold wouldn't. He promised." "Harold promised to love and protect me," I said, and for the first time, a tremor of real emotion entered my voice. "And he did. He protected me from you." The doorbell rang then, a cheerful, chiming sound that was utterly incongruous with the tension in the room. Charles stared at the door, bewildered. "That would be your 10 a.m. appointment," I said, glancing at the clock on the mantel. "The realtor with the Mrs. Gable who is so very interested in buying my house." The color that had drained from his face came rushing back in a hot, dark flush of humiliation. He understood. He understood that this wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a performance, and he was the unwilling star. He crumpled the paper in his fist. "You will not do this," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous rasp. "I will fight this. I will drag you through every court in the state. I will ruin you." I simply smiled that thin, sharp smile again. "No, you won't," I said. "Because you, Charles, care about one thing above all else, appearances. And a public court battle where it's revealed you tried to throw your son's grieving widow onto the street? After she legally owned the house all along? That won't play well at the country club. Your friends, the ones you were supposed to be golfing with this morning, they value legacy. But they despise weakness. And you, my dear father-in-law, have been exposed as both a bully and a fool." His entire body seemed to shrink. The imposing patriarch was gone, replaced by a withered, furious old man. I stepped aside, gesturing to the front door with a graceful sweep of my hand, just as he had done to me weeks earlier. I raised my voice so the men outside could hear. "Boys," I called out, my tone as sweet as iced tea on a summer afternoon. "If you could please come in. Mr. Collins needs some help with his things. The driveway is that way." The three brothers entered, their presence filling the room. They looked at Charles, then at me, and then back at Charles. Frank, the eldest, simply asked, "Ma'am, what all is going?" "Everything that isn't mine," I said. I pointed to a few suitcases in the corner, Charles's things. Then I gestured around the room. "And all of my furniture and boxes that are currently sitting in the truck that brought them here. I want them brought back inside. Exactly where they were." The movers exchanged a look. This was an unusual job, but they were professionals. They started with Charles's suitcases. As they carried the first one out, the realtor and the prospective buyers, a young couple I'd hired from a local acting school, were walking up the path. They stopped, utterly bewildered, as they saw a well-dressed older gentleman's luggage being unceremoniously loaded onto a moving truck. The humiliation on Charles's face was absolute. He was trapped. There was no escape. He stood, impotent, as my life was systematically moved back in, and his was moved out. He watched as the movers carefully unwrapped my grandmother's china. He watched as they placed Harold's armchair back in its rightful place. He watched as I personally rehung our wedding photograph on the wall, pressing it gently against the faint dusty rectangle where it belonged. By sunset, it was done. The last of Charles's belongings were in a small pile on the curb. He stood beside them, looking lost and small. He didn't look at me as he finally called a taxi. He just got in when it arrived and was driven away, leaving his things on the grass like an offering to his own failed cruelty. I was alone. In my house. My home. Sarah had left hours earlier, after squeezing my hand and telling me to call if I needed anything. The movers were long gone. The quiet settled back into the house, but it was a different quiet now. It wasn't the silence of loss. It was the silence of peace. Of sanctuary reclaimed. I walked out onto the front porch, the one Charles had stood on so triumphantly. I had a bottle of Harold's favorite bourbon and a single lowball glass. I poured 2 fingers, the amber liquid catching the last rays of the setting sun. The scent of the magnolias filled the evening air. My roses would grow back. The wallpaper could be replaced. A house is just wood and nails. But a home is a fortress. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned, a warm, welcome fire in my chest. I looked at the empty space on the curb where Charles had stood. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a surge of wild, victorious joy. I just felt a profound sense of rightness. Of balance restored. I just smiled. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need fire and fury. Sometimes, all it needs is a pen, a little foresight, and 40 years of patience, and that's how it ended. Not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of a door and the turning of a key. Justice doesn't always come dressed in a robe and carrying a gavel. Sometimes it comes in the form of a 68-year-old woman in a cream-colored pantsuit, holding a piece of paper that speaks louder than any threat or any insult. Charles never bothered me again. The story, as I knew it would, made its way through the grapevine of our small town, and his reputation was ruined far more effectively than any lawsuit could have accomplished. I live in my house. I tend my garden. And every evening, I have a glass of bourbon on the porch and I think of Harold. I think of his love, a love so strong it reached back from the great beyond to protect me one last time. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, and if you believe that the quietest people can have the strongest resolve, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a comment below. What's a time you saw patience pay off in a big way? I read every one. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, earned one step at a time. Until next time, be patient, be prepared, and never let anyone make you feel like you're just married in. You are the foundation.